Joseph Lowndes, in your new book, From the New Deal to the New Right, you argue that modern conservatism was founded in the South. Why?
The reason I make that claim is that I think that often people talk about a Southern strategy and a capture of the South by the GOP after the 1960s, beginning with Goldwater and then in Nixon's '72 election. But I think in some ways the situation is the reverse, that Southerners played a key role in the development, first in the conservative capture of the Republican Party itself, and then of Republican ascendance nationally. And I think that in certain ways a combination of Southern segregationist politics and Northern economic conservatism were blended over time by various political actors in a way that allowed a national language of kind of racial resentment and opposition to federal state power and the Democratic Party generally.
Well, two questions arise from that answer. Number one, how did they blend and when did this begin?
I think the story begins decisively in the 1940s. I mean, in the 1930s in Congress there's a conservative coalition which comes together after 1936 to resist some of FDR's political imperatives. But really it's after World War II when, during the Truman administration, when he begins to push for a Federal Employment Practices Commission and the desegregation of the military, that you have Southern political elites suddenly declare independence from the National Democratic Party, and first running a Dixiecrat, what's called the Dixiecrat or States' Rights Revolt in 1948. The strategy was to try to get enough electoral college votes in the South to throw the national election into the House of Representatives, which didn't quite work, but it began a process of separating Southern Democrats from National Democrats generally, and from the growing racial liberalism of the National Democratic Party. And I think then what happened was that conservatives in the North, frustrated with Eisenhower, frustrated with what they saw as the Me Tooism of the Republican Party in the New Deal era, began to look southward for allies in kind of a new coalition to rebuild a conservative party and push back against the New Deal. So the National Review magazine, for instance, begins inviting segregationist writers and journalists and others to pen editorials and write articles for National Review. And some conservative Republican strategists begin to try to build a Republican Party in the South, which had not ever been a viable party, certainly not after Reconstruction. So both at the level of kind of intellectual discourse and party strategy, it begins in the 50s that Northerners begin to look southward.
So the shared interests were economic?
Economic and racial, I think. Partly it's Southern segregationists segregationist elites saw that their struggle was going to remain regional unless they could find allies outside the region, and convince other white Southerners who were quite loyal to the New Deal that they needed to abandon their democratic loyalty for politics that would really resist the racial liberalism of the National Party. So I think it's partly that. And Northern conservatives who didn't have a big stake in race prior to the 1950s began to find ways to see how racial politics would animate Northern audiences and begin to peel off segments of the white working class and others from the kind of a hegemonic Democratic Party. So it's really kind of both, I think.
Who were some of the leaders of this movement?
I trace it in the 1940s to certain Dixiecrat leaders, Charles Wallace Collins in particular.
Who is he?
He's kind of the intellectual guru of the Dixiecrat revolt, who not only is a hard kind of white supremacist, segregationist leader, but he's one who really seeks to convince Strom Thurmond, John Temple Graves, other Southern elites, that they really have to articulate a conservative anti-government politics, a business conservatism, as well as a kind of a racial anti-government politics. And so he's one of the leaders. In the 1950s and 60s, Buckley, William F. Buckley, who it's not often remembered that he really makes dramatic efforts to bring Southerners into the conservative coalition. He pens an editorial in '57 arguing that denial of the vote to black citizens in the South is perfectly justifiable because these people have not reached a level of civilization that would allow them to participate democratically. So Buckley's another figure. Goldwater clearly is someone who, when he runs in '64, outside of his own state of Arizona, only wins a handful of deep South states. Nowhere else in the nation is he a strong figure.
And why did he win those states?
He had in the 1964 election. One of the major issues was the Great Civil Rights Bill that Johnson had proposed, and Goldwater's opposition to the Civil Rights Bill was one of the things that was used by his Southern supporters over and over to try to get votes for him. So really, it was civil rights in the South for him articulated as kind of a strong constitutionalism and states' rights and individualist kind of ideology.
Joseph Lowndes, what's the Southern strategy? How would you define that?
What people refer to as the Southern strategy, they begin with either Goldwater or Nixon, and the idea is that Northern Republicans hope to win over Southern voters and to win Southern states in national elections by pushing the race issue, by articulating kind of either a coded or open language for Nixon it's anti-busing, for Goldwater it's opposition to the Civil Rights Bill. And so that's what people refer to when they talk about the Southern strategy. But again, what's missed in that is the agency and activity of Southerners themselves who help put this on the table and provide a language of racial politics that will play not just in the South, but in Gary, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, and in Baltimore, Maryland, and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where issues of open housing, open unions, other anti-discrimination measures, and things that are focused directly on race potentially can reap a broader white audience.
So how do you get from the New Deal to the New Right today?
To the New Deal, to the New Right today? Well, I begin by, the story I tell is by looking at elements both in and outside of the New Deal, Southern Democrats and Northern Republicans, conservative Republicans, and Western Republicans, who begin to bring their political perspectives together in opposition to the New Deal, and to finally a place where by 1980, Ronald Reagan wins decisively, and by '84 even more so, and the beginning of a national realignment, a national regime change, which is what we, I think, are at the end of now.
Well,